Hello, my name is Hasan Sorrells, and this is Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast, episode number 77. With our book today, the book which sets the tone for where the fellowship that we last left in Lord of the Rings, the Fellowship of the Ring, is going, and that closes the door on where the fellowship actually came from in that book. It is quite probably the most tragic and equally the most hopeful book the author ever wrote. The second part of the Lord of the Rings trilogy, J.R.R. Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers. Today on the podcast, behold, I come back to you now at the turn of the tide. And now back to Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers by J.R.R. Tolkien. I am reading today from the HarperCollins Clarion Books edition published in 2004. This is the 50th anniversary edition. Reading from Book 3, The White Rider. At that moment, the old man quickened his pace and came with surprising speed to the foot of the rock wall. Then suddenly he looked up. While they stood motionless looking down, there was no sound. They could not see his face. He was hooded, and above the hood he wore a wide-brimmed hat so that all his features were overshadowed except for the end of his nose and his gray beard. Yet it seemed to Aragorn that he caught the gleam of eyes keen and bright from within the shadow of the hooded brows. At last the old man broke the silence. "Well met indeed, my friends," he said in a soft voice. "I wish to speak to you. Will you come down, or shall I come up?" Without waiting for an answer, he began to climb. "Now," cried Gimli, "stop him, Legolas." "Did I not say that I wished to speak to you?" said the old man. "Put away that bow, Master Elf." The bow and arrow flew from Legolas's hands, and his arms hung loose at his sides. "And you, Master Dwarf, pray take your hand from your axe haft till I am up. You will not need such arguments." Gimli started and then stood still as stone, staring while the old man sprung up the rough steps as nimbly as a goat. All weariness seemed to have left him. As he stepped up onto the shelf, there was a gleam, too brief for certainty, a quick glint of white, as if some garment shrouded by the gray rags had been for an instant revealed. The intake of Gimli's breath could be heard as a loud hiss in the silence. "Well met, I say again," said the old man, coming towards them. When he was a few feet away, he stood, stooping over his staff, with his head thrust forward, peering at them from under his hood. "And what may you be doing in these parts? An elf, a man, and a dwarf, all clad in elvish fashion? No doubt there is a tale worth hearing behind it all. Such things are not often seen here." "You speak as one that knows Fangorn well," said Aragorn. "Is that so?" "Not well," said the old man. "That would be the study of many lives, but I come here now, and again." "Might we know your name, and then hear what it is that you have to say to us?" said Aragorn. "The morning passes, and we have an errand that will not wait." "As for what I wish to say, I have said it. What may you be doing, and what tale can you tell of yourselves? As for my name—" He broke off, laughing long and softly. Aragorn felt a shudder run through him at the sound, a strange, cold thrill, and yet it was not fear or terror that he felt. Rather, it was like the sudden bite of a keen air, or the slap of a cold rain that wakes an uneasy sleeper. "My name," said the old man. "Have you not guessed it already? You have heard it before, I think. Yes, you have heard it before. But come now, what of your tale?" The three companions stood silent and made no answer. "There are some who would begin to doubt whether your errand is fit to tell," said the old man. "Happily, I know something of it. You are tracking the footsteps of two young hobbits, I believe." "Yes, hobbits. Don't stare as if you have never heard the strange name before. You have, and so have I. Well, they climbed up here the day before yesterday, and they met someone that they did not expect. Does that comfort you? And now, would you like to know where they were taken? Well, maybe I can give you some news about that. But why are we standing? Your errand, you see, is no longer as urgent as you thought. Let us sit down and be more at ease." The old man turned away and went towards a heap of fallen stones and rock at the foot of the cliff behind. Immediately, as if a spell had been removed, the others relaxed and stirred. Gimli's hand went at once to his axe haft. Aragorn drew his sword. Legolas picked up his bow. The old man took no notice, but stooped and sat himself on a low, flat stone. Then his gray cloak drew apart, and they saw, beyond doubt, that he was clothed beneath all in white. "Sauruman!" cried Gimli, springing toward him with an axe in hand. "Speak! Tell us where you have hidden our friends. What have you done with them? Speak, or I will make a dint in your hat that even a wizard will find it hard to deal with." The old man was too quick for him. He sprang to his feet and leaped to the top of a large rock. There he stood, grown suddenly tall, towering above them. His hood and his gray rags were flung away. His white garment shone. He lifted up his staff, and Gimli's axe leaped from its grasp and fell ringing on the ground. The sword of Aragorn, stiff in his motionless hand, blazed with a sudden fire. Legolas gave a great shout and shot an arrow high into the air. It vanished in a flash of flame. "Mithrandir!" he cried. "Mithrandir!" "Well met, I say again to you, Legolas," said the old man. They all gazed at him. His hair was as white as snow in the sunshine, and gleaming white as was his robe. The eyes under his deep brows were bright, piercing as the rays of the sun. Power was in his hand. Between wonder, joy, and fear, they stood and found no words to say. At last Aragorn stirred. "Gandalf," he said, "beyond all hope you returned to us in our need. What veil was over my sight? Gandalf!" Gimli said nothing, but sank to his knees, shading his eyes. "Gandalf," the old man repeated, as if recalling from an old memory a long disused word. "Yes, that was the name. I was Gandalf." He stepped down from the rock and, picking up his gray cloak, wrapped it about him. It seemed as if the sun had been shining, but now was hid in a cloud again. "Yes, you may still call me Gandalf," he said. And the voice was the voice of their old friend and guide. "Get up, my good Gimli. No blame to you, and no harm done to me. Indeed, my friends, none of you have any weapon that could hurt me. Be merry, we meet again. At the turn of the tide. The great storm is coming, but the tide has turned." He laid his hand on Gimli's head, and the dwarf looked up and laughed suddenly. "Gandalf," he said, "but you are all in white." "Yes, I am white now," said Gandalf. "Indeed, I am Sauruman, one might almost say. Sauruman as he should have been. But come now, tell me of yourselves. I have passed through fire and deep water since we parted. I have forgotten much that I thought I knew, and learned again much that I had forgotten. I can see many things far off, but many things are close at hand that I cannot see. Tell me of yourselves." We pick up after the Fellowship has been broken in Book 3 of The Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers. Boromir is dead. Gandalf was dead, having smote the Balrog and seen his body lay down upon the mountainside, somewhere below the bridge at Khazad-dûm. And Frodo and Sam have decided to strike out on their own, being tracked by Gollum on their way to Mount Doom. In the Two Towers, all hope is lost. And it's hope in man that is lost. The former, or shall I say late, Senator John McCain, who knew a little bit about this himself after being trapped or captured in the Hanoi Hilton during the Vietnam War, once infamously and ruefully said, "It's always darkest in the dark," which is a line for people that resonates with people who tend to not be religious in their pursuit of hope. However, J.R.R. Tolkien was a Christian man. He was a believer in the he was a believer in the Trinity, and he also believed in God. And when it is dark and hopeless, and all human efforts have come to nothing, the temptation to succumb to nihilism and despair can be great. And we are seeing this in our time as human efforts to solve problems that we think are large and unsolvable, and perhaps they are if they were merely in our hands, is driving more and more people to nihilism and despair. But nihilism and despair is a fool's errand and is the indulgence of a luxurious and luxuriating mind. It is the provenance of a mind that is more interested in being entertained than a mind that is interested in leading others towards hope. There is wisdom for leaders in this exchange between Frodo and Gandalf in Fellowship. In the Fellowship of the Ring, the first book, in the chapter The Shadow of the Past, when they are looking for a way through the mines of Moria. And Frodo, carrying the ring, but not really quite ready to fully acknowledge what it is that is happening with him or to him, speaks to Gandalf and says, "I wish it need not have happened in my time. I wish the ring had never come to me." And Gandalf, before the Balrog and before his return at the turn of the tide in the Two Towers, gives a little wisdom to Frodo, which is helpful and acts as a prequel in idea to what will occur at the Battle of Helm's Deep and other places in the Two Towers. He says to Frodo, "So do I, and so do all who live to see such times, but that is not for them to decide. All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given to us." Wisdom from Tolkien, Christian wisdom, quite frankly, that leaders, both secular and humanist and otherwise, need to take to heart. Sure, the problems of our era, if we place our hope in man, will be unsolvable. But what exactly are you going to do with the time that is given to you? That is the challenge set forth in the Two Towers, and we're going to see different examples of how different characters rise or fall in the face of this challenge, including Sauruman, King Theoden, and of course, that groveling yes man, Grima Wormtongue. And we're going to do all of that today, like I said before, on the podcast. Back to the book, back to The Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers. We're going to pick up with, we're going to pick up in book 3 with the King of the Golden Hall. And we're going to talk about being surrounded by venal yes men. At that moment, Hama came again from the hall. Behind him, cringing between two other men, came Grima the Wormtongue. His face was very white. His eyes blinked in the sunlight. Hama knelt and presented to Theoden a long sword and a scabbard clasped with gold and set with green gems. "Here, Lord, is Herogrim, your ancient blade," he said. "It was found in his chest. Loath he was to render up the keys. Many other things are there which men have missed." "You lie," said Wormtongue, "and the sword your master himself gave into my keeping." "And now he requires it of you again," said Theoden. "Does that displease you?" "Assuredly not, Lord," said Wormtongue. "I care for you and yours as best I may. But do not weary yourself or tax too heavily your strength. Let others deal with these irksome guests. Your meat is about to be set on the board. Will you not go to it?" "I will," said Theoden, "and let food for my guests be set to the board beside me. The host rides today. Send the heralds forth. Let them summon all who dwell nigh. Every man and strong lad able to bear arms, all who have horses, Let them be ready in the saddle at the gate ere the second hour from noon." "Dear lord," cried Wormtongue, "it is as I feared. This wizard has bewitched you. Are none to be left to defend the golden hall of your fathers and all your treasure? None to guard the lord of the mark?" "If this is bewitchment," said Theoden, "it seems to me more wholesome than your whisperings. Your leechcraft ere long would have me walking on all fours like a beast. No, not one shall be left, not even Grima. Grima shall ride too. Go! You have time yet to clean the rust from your sword." "Mercy, lord," whined Wormtongue, groveling on the ground. "Have pity on one worn out in your service. Send me not from your side. I at least will stand by you when all the others have gone. Do not send your faithful Grima away." "You have my pity," said Theoden, "and I do not send you from my side. I go myself to war with my men. I bid you come with me and prove your faith." Wormtongue looked from face to face. In his eyes was the hunted look of a beast seeking some gap in the ring of his enemies. He licked his lips with a long, pale tongue. "Such a resolve might be expected from a lord of the house of J.R.R, old though he be," he said. "For those who truly love him would spare his failing years. Yet I see that I come too late. Others, whom the death of my lord would perhaps grieve less, have already persuaded him. If I cannot undo their work, hear me at least in this, lord. One who knows your mind and honors your commands should be left in Edoras. Appoint a faithful steward. Let your counselor Grima keep all things till you return, and pray that we may see it, though no wise man will deem it hopeful." Éomer laughed. "And if that plea does not excuse you from war, most noble Wormtongue," he said, "what office of less honor would you accept? To carry a sack of meal up into the mountains, if any man would trust you with it?" "Nay, Éomer, you do not fully understand the mind of Master Wormtongue," said Gandalf, turning his piercing glance upon him. "He is bold and cunning. Even now he plays a game with peril and wins a throw. Hours of my precious time he has wasted already. Down, snake!" he said suddenly in a terrible voice. "Down on your belly! How long is it since Sauruman bought you? What was the promised price? When all the men were dead, you were to pick your share of the treasure and take the women you desire? Too long have you watched her under your eyelids and haunted her steps." Éomer grasped his sword. "That I knew already," he muttered. "For that reason I would have slain him before, forgetting the law of the hall. But there are other reasons." He stepped forward, but Gandalf stayed him with his hand. "Éowyn is safe now," he said. "But you, Wormtongue, you have done what you could for your true master. Some reward you have earned at least. Yet Sauruman is apt to overlook his bargains. I should advise you to go quickly and remind him lest he forget your faithful service." "You lie," said Wormtongue. "That word comes too often easy from your lips," said Gandalf. "I do not lie. See, Theoden, here is a snake. With safety you cannot take it with you, nor can you leave it behind. To slay it would be just. But it was not always as it now is. Once it was a man, and it did service you in some fashion. Give him a horse, and let him go at once wherever he chooses. By his choice you shall judge him." "Do you hear this, Wormtongue?" said Theoden. "This is your choice. To ride with me to war, and let us see in battle whether you are true, or to go now whither you will. But then, if we ever meet again, I shall not be merciful." Slowly, Wormtongue rose. He looked at them with half-closed eyes. Last of all he scanned Theoden's face and opened his mouth as if to speak. Then suddenly he drew himself up. His hands worked, his eyes glittered. Such malice was in them that men stepped back from them. He bared his teeth, and then with a hissing breath he spat before the king's feet. Darting to one side, he fled down the stair. "After him," said Theoden. "See that he does no harm to any, but do not hurt him or hinder him. Give him a horse if he wishes it." "And if any will bear him," said Éomer. One of the guards ran down the stair. Another went to the well at the foot of the terrace and in his helm drew water. With it he washed clean the stones that Wormtongue had defiled. Well. So, the King of Rohan was going to learn a lesson that King Lear didn't learn, and that Julius Caesar didn't learn, and that we'll see later on in Return of the King that the steward of Gondor, Denethor I, didn't learn. Fortunately, Theoden, the king of Rohan, learned the lesson. And the lesson is this: when you're blinded by bad advice, delivered via charm and flattery when times are good, you can be lulled into inaction. And then when the dragon, or the snake, such as it were, of destruction, is at your door as a leader or at the door of your team, you will not have the will to face it. In the movie, when this is dramatized, many folks have seen this, including myself multiple times, Gandalf sort of walks in and, sort of frees Theoden from the spell of the words that Grima Wormtongue has used to weave a tight rope, or not maybe rope, a tight net of control around him and around his decisions. And the King of Rohan is part of a country, a people who are horse lords. Think like the Marine Commandos or Special Forces guys. They don't really like to lose. Éomer, his son, and Éowyn, his daughter, have... Not Éowyn, but Éomer has gone out and is dealing with the orcs, dealing with Sauron and Saruman's legions that are beginning to push on Rohan's borders. They are beginning to insist on themselves, as evil often does. Grima Wormtongue, of course, is sent to the King of Rohan by Sauruman, formerly the White, now who's having some troubles in his own right, in his own tower, who believes that he can bargain a better deal with that red-wreathed eye. The King of Rohan should have read his King Lear, right? Charm and flattery are the tools of evil men, and they will turn on you. They will reveal themselves when they are pushed into a corner. But first, before they go out the door, they'll wreck everything, and they'll claim that those that are pushing them, those that are cleaning house on them, they'll claim that those individuals are evil in and of themselves. They will seek to muddy the waters on their way out the door. There's multiple lessons in the chapter, The King of the Golden Hall, in the Two Towers for leaders, but the biggest one, I guess, is the one that Gandalf represents, and it is this idea that the truth, capital T truth, no matter how hard it is to stomach, can set your organization, can set your team, and can set you as a leader free, but you have to let it. Gandalf would have had no power if the King of Rohan hadn't actually wanted him to be there. And evil like Grima Wormtongue, the evil that comes in charm and flattery and leads to passive inaction, evil always retreats from the truth, for it cannot stand in the light of it. Deliver the truth in a timely fashion, with awareness of the room you're in, and then let the chips fall where they may. For even the wisest leaders cannot possibly know all ends. Speaking of Sauruman, no longer the White, but Sauruman, the Black, or Sauruman the Gray, or Sauruman the morally compromised Sauruman. Let's go back to the book. Let's turn back to the Two Towers. We're going to go once again to book 3. We're spending a lot of time at book 3. And by the way, we're not reading the whole book. We can't possibly do that. There's several things in here that you need to read. The Battle of Helm's Deep is quite an excellent chapter. and the road to Isengard, Flotsam and Jetsam. Again, excellent chapters. You're going to want to pick up this book because you're going to want to find out about Treebeard and the Uruk-hai, the Riders of Rohan. And then, on the other side, you're going to want to find out about Shelob and the Chronicles, or the choices, not really the Chronicles, the choices of Master Samwise on their way to the tower. But we are going to focus really on, well, Saruman kind of getting his comeuppance a little bit here in the chapter The Voice of Saruman from The Two Towers by J.R.R. Tolkien. If we speak of poisoned tongues, what shall we say of yours, young serpent? Said Saruman, and the flash of his anger was now plain to see. But come, Eomer's son, he went on in his soft voice again, to every man his part. Valor in arms is yours, and you win high honor thereby. Slay whom your lord names enemies, and be content. Meddle not in policies which you do not understand. But maybe if you become king, you will find that he must choose his friends with care. The friendship of Saruman and the power of Wormtongue cannot lightly be thrown aside, whatever grievances, real or fancied, may lie behind. You have won a battle, but not a war, and that with help on which you cannot count again. You may find the shadow of the wood at your own door next. It is wayward and senseless, and has no love for men. But my lord of Rohan, am I to be called a murderer because valiant men have fallen in battle? If you go to war needlessly, for I did not desire it, then men will be slain. But if I am a murderer on that account, then all the house of Uriel is stained with murder, for they have fought many wars and assailed many who defied them. Yet with some they have afterwards made peace, and none the worse for being politic. I say, Theoden king, shall we have peace and friendship, you and I? It is ours to command. We will have peace, Theoden at last, thickly and with an effort. Several of the riders cried out gladly. Theoden held up his hand. Yes, we will have peace, he said now in a clear voice. We will have peace when you and all your works have perished, and the works of your dark master to whom you would deliver us. You are a liar, Saruman, and a corrupter of men's hearts. You hold out your hand to me, and I perceive only a finger of the claw of Mordor, cruel and cold. Even if your war on me was just, as it was not, for were you 10 times as wise, you would have no right to rule me in mind for your own profit as you desired. Even so, what will you say of your tortures in Westfold and the children that lie dead there? And they hewed Hama's body before the gates of the Hornburg after he was dead. When you hang from a gibbet at your window for the sport of your own crows, I will have peace with you and Orthanc. So much for the house of Uriel. A lesser son of great sires am I, but I do not need to lick your fingers. Turn elsewhither. But I fear your voice has lost its charm. The riders gazed up at Theoden like men startled out of a dream. Harsh as an old raven's, their master's voice sounded in their ears after the music of Saruman. But Saruman for a while was beside himself with wrath. He leaned over the rail as if he would smite the king with his staff. To some, suddenly it seemed that they saw a snake coiling itself to strike. Gibbets and crows, he hissed, and they shuddered at the hideous charge. Dotard, what is the house of Uriel but a thatched barn where brigands drink in the reek and their brats roll on the floor among the dogs? Too long have they escaped the gibbet themselves. But the noose comes, slow and drawing tight and hard in the end. Hang, if you will. Now his voice changed as he slowly mastered himself. I know not why I have had the patience to speak to you, for I need you not, nor your little band of gallopers, as swift to fly as to advance, Theoden Horsemaster. Long ago I offered you a state beyond your merit and your wit. I have offered it again, so that those whom you mislead may clearly see the choice of roads. You give me brag and abuse. So be it. Go back to your huts. But you, Gandalf, for you at least I am grieved, feeling for your shame. How comes it that you can endure such company? For you are proud, Gandalf, and not without reason, having a noble mind and eyes that look both deep and far. Even now will you not listen to my counsel? Gandalf stirred and looked up. What have you to say that you did not say at our last meeting, he asked, or perhaps you have things to unsay? Saruman paused. Unsay? He mused as if puzzled. Unsay? I endeavored to advise you for your own good, but you scarcely listened. You are proud and do not love advice, having indeed a store of your own wisdom. But on that occasion you erred, I think, misconstruing my intentions willfully. I fear that in my eagerness to persuade you I lost patience, and indeed I regret it. For I bore you no ill will, and even now I bear none, though you return to me in the company of the violent and the ignorant. How should I? Are we not both members of a high and ancient order, most excellent in Middle-earth? Our friendship would profit us both alike. Much we could still accomplish together to heal the disorders of the world. Let us understand one another and dismiss from thought these lesser folk. Let them wait on our decisions. For the common good I am willing to redress the past, and to receive you. Will you not consult with me? Will you not come up? So great was the power that Sauruman exerted in this last effort that none that stood within hearing were unmoved. But now the spell was wholly different. They heard the gentle remonstrance of a kindly king with an erring but much-loved minister. But they were shut out, listening at the door to words not meant for them. Ill-mannered children or stupid servants overhearing the elusive discourse of their elders and wondering how it would affect their lot. Of loftier mold these two were made, reverend and wise. It was inevitable that they should make an alliance. Gandalf would ascend into the tower to discuss deep things beyond their comprehension in the high chambers of Orthanc. The door would be closed, and they would be left outside, dismissed to await allotted work or punishment. Even in the mind of Theoden, the thought took shape like a shadow of a doubt. He will betray us. He will go. We shall be lost. Then Gandalf laughed. Fantasy vanished like a puff of smoke. Sauruman, said Gandalf, still laughing. Sauruman, you missed your path in life. You should have been the king's jester and earned your bread and stripes, too, by mimicking his counselors. Ah, me. He paused, getting the better of his mirth. Understand one another? I fear I am beyond your comprehension, but you, Sauruman, I understand now too well. I keep a clearer memory of your arguments and deeds than you suppose. When I last visited you, you were the jailer of Mordor, and there I was to be sent. Nay, the guest who has escaped from the roof will think twice before he comes back in by the door. Nay, I do not think I will come up. But listen, Sauruman, for the last time. Will you not come down? Isengard has proved less strong than your hope and fancy made it. So many other things in which you still have trust. Would it not be well to leave it for a while? To turn to new things, perhaps? Think well, Sauruman. Will you not come down? 20 years ago, when I was a much, much younger man, at least 20 years younger, I worked in a movie theater and happened to have the pleasure of putting together the Fellowship of the Ring and previewing it before anybody else had an opportunity to see it back in the day, before social media and before everybody knew everything, everywhere, all at once. Also, the opportunity a year later to put together the Two Towers and then later on Return to the King. I count it as one of the best things I've ever had the opportunity to participate in my time. Watching those movies and watching the great Christopher Lee and the great Ian McKellen play off of each other as Sauruman and as Gandalf respectively, brought to light, as only Shakespearean acting can do, the true British, the true European nature of Tolkien's writing. Sauruman was a man, a wizard actually, who was supposed to come into the world and was supposed to be, at least in the world of Middle-earth, a guide, the head of the order, wise, right? And Gandalf came along with him. Gandalf wasn't, though, the initial pick. Sauruman was the guy. Sauruman was the William McKinley of Middle-earth. He was the guy who was, or if you want to go biblical, he was the Saul of Middle-earth. He was tall, he was good-looking. He was the guy that leadership was supposed to go to. And then Saruman made decisions, right? And those decisions led to impure motives. And those impure motives led to impure actions. For it is not what goes into the mouth of man that is impure, but it is what comes out of his heart through his mouth that is impure. And then, at the end of all that, Gandalf shows up, right? And Sauruman, who is becoming increasingly deceitful, decides to throw him down and decides to try to break his staff. Now Gandalf escapes, goes away, comes back as Gandalf the White, and then he throws Sauruman down and he breaks his staff. But Sauruman, just like Grima Wormtongue, is going to get a vote. The enemy always gets a vote. And this is what leaders have to understand. The enemy is going to get a vote. The enemy is going to decide what they are going to do, but you have to be really focused on what you are going to do. You have to be focused on how you are going to respond. You have to be hyper-focused on what your mission and your goals are. One of the clever ways that the enemy uses to worm his or her way in to your team is they have those impure motives, and of course they engage in deceit. But when they're busted, they impute those impure motives. They give them to others. When you know what the right thing is to do or say, and you don't do the right thing, that failure to act, that failure to do the right thing is a sin. When you know the right thing to do or say and you fail to act or speak, you're engaging in lying and deceit to accomplish goals that you don't think you could accomplish with the truth. People engaged in deceit and lies, like Sauruman, like Grima Wormtongue, like Sauron at Mordor and the orcs. People engaged in deceit and lies. They project their moral failings onto others in the form of blame shifting, credit taking, ego posturing, and of course, and this is a big one, and Sauruman does it in here, outright intimidation. And just like Sauruman, and the irony of this is not lost on me as a podcaster or as a person who makes his living through talking, they will drown the righteous in a sea of words. Leaders, fundamentally at the end of the day, projection should only happen in a movie theater. If you're projecting your motives onto others, if you're blame shifting, credit taking, ego posturing, and engaged in any form of intimidation at all, you will get your comeuppance. The consequences will fall on you at some point. Check yourself before you wreck the team. Now, if you're in the position of a Gandalf where you have to call this out, he shows the way in this chapter. He uses humor first to soften up and to break the spell. I loved how Tolkien put that. To break the spell of Saruman's words. Because once you break the spell, once you use humor to disarm the liar, disarm the deceit, once you use it to challenge the person's authority, then and only then can you go in and do the hard work of telling the truth to whoever will listen to it. Back to the book, back to The Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers. We're going to jog over to book 4, The Window on the West. It seemed to Sam that he had only dozed for a few minutes when he awoke to find that it was late afternoon and Faramir had come back. He had brought many men with him. Indeed, all the survivors of the foray were now gathered on the slope nearby, 200 or 300 strong. They sat in a wide semicircle, between the arms of which Faramir was seated on the ground, while Frodo stood before him. It looked strangely like the trial of a prisoner. Sam crept out from the fern, but no one paid any attention to him, and he placed himself at the end of the rows of men where he could see and hear all that was going on. He watched and listened intently, ready to dash to his master's aid if needed. He could see Faramir's face, which was now unmasked. It was stern and commanding, and a keen wit lay behind its searching glance. Doubt was in the gray eyes that gazed steadily at Frodo. Sam soon became aware that the captain was not satisfied with Frodo's account of himself at several points. What part he had to play in the company that set out from Rivendell, why he had left Boromir, and where he was now going. In particular, he returned often to Isildur's Bane. Plainly, he saw that Frodo was concealing from him some matter of great importance. But it was at the coming of the halfling that Isildur's Bane should waken, or so one must read the words, he insisted. If then you are the halfling that was named, doubtless you brought this thing, whatever it may be, to the council of which you speak, and there Boromir saw it. Do you deny it? Frodo made no answer. So, said Faramir, I wish then to learn from you more of it. For what concerns Boromir concerns me. An orc arrow slew Isildur, so far as the old tales tell, but orc arrows are plenty, and the sight of one would not be taken as a sign of doom by Boromir of Gondor. Had you this thing in keeping? Is it hidden, you say? But is not that because you choose to hide it? No, not because I choose, answered Frodo. It does not belong to me. It does not belong to any mortal, great or small. Though if any could claim it, it would be Aragorn, son of Arathorn, whom I named the leader of our company, from Moria to Rauros. Why so? And not Boromir, prince of the city that the sons of Elendil founded? Because Aragorn is descended in direct lineage, father to father, from Isildur, Elendil's son himself, and the sword that he bears was Elendil's sword. A murmur of astonishment ran through all the ring of men. Some cried aloud, the sword of Elendil, the sword of Elendil comes to Minas Tirith. Great tidings. But Faramir's face was unmoved. Maybe, he said, but so great a claim will need to be established, and clear proofs will be required, should this Aragorn ever come to Minas Tirith. He had not come, nor any of your company, when I set out 6 days ago. Boromir was satisfied of that claim, said Frodo. Indeed, if Boromir were here, he would answer all your questions. And since he was already at Rauros many days back and intended then to go straight to your city if you return, you may soon learn the answers there. My part in the company was known to him, as to all the others, for it was appointed by me of Elrond of Imladris, himself before the whole council. On that errand I came into this country, but it is not mine to reveal to any outside the company. Yet those who claim to oppose the enemy would do well not to hinder it. Frodo's tone was proud. Whatever he felt, and Sam approved of it, but it did not appease Faramir. So, he said, you bid me to mind my own affairs and get me back home and let you be. Boromir will tell all when he comes. When he comes, say you. Were you a friend of Boromir? Vividly before Frodo's mind came the memory of Boromir's assault upon him, and for a moment he hesitated. Faramir's eyes watching him grew hard. Boromir was a valiant member of our company, said Frodo at length. Yes, I was his friend, for my part. Faramir smiled grimly. Then you would grieve to learn Boromir is dead? I would grieve indeed, said Frodo, and catching the look in Faramir's eyes, he faltered. Dead? He said. Do you mean that he is dead? That you knew it? You would try to trap me in words, playing with me, or are you now trying to snare me with a falsehood? I would not snare even an orc with a falsehood, said Faramir. How then did he die, and how do you know of it, since you say that none of the company had reached the city when you left? As to the manner of his death, I had hoped that his friend and companion would tell me how it was. But he was alive and strong when we parted, and he lives still for all that I know, though surely there are many perils in the world. Many indeed, said Faramir, and treachery not the least. Faramir, for all his honor and for all his ability and for all of his talent and skill in leading the men of Gondor, didn't know what the score was. And unlike Boromir, he did not react impulsively when he did not know what the score was. Instead, he took the time to actively and thoroughly interrogate reality. Interrogating reality, yours and other people's, when you are in charge and you don't know the score, is a critical skill for leaders. When you don't know what the deal is, when you don't know who the players in the game are, your best move is to sometimes be neutral. It's to take measure of the situation you're in and to ask a bunch of questions for clarification first. Faramir's actions are a leadership clinic for not only people who are second in command, but also for people who are first in command. Now, very often we say that, well, leaders should know the score, as if by some magic it'll just come out of the sky or via osmosis. But the fact of the matter is, you're a person, just like other members of the team are. And most people, quite frankly, are ignorant. By the way, this doesn't mean they're stupid. It just means that they don't know what they don't know. And so if the expectation is that because you have a position of power that you should know the score, instead of acting as if when things change, interrogate reality. Ask good questions. Figure out what the lay of the land is going to be before rushing in to solve a problem that may not necessarily need to be solved. Faramir also exhibits a fair bit of vulnerability, and not vulnerability in the ways that we talk about it in the early part of the 21st century in the West. This isn't the vulnerability or empathy of a person seeking justice or a person seeking inclusion or belonging. This is the vulnerability that's timely and designed to save lives. We confuse this kind of vulnerability with transparency of information, and they are not the same thing. Timely vulnerability has saved more lives and will save more lives in the future, and has saved more lives in the past than rushing in to deal out death or acting without rational reasoning via impulse. And if you're just going in as a leader to deal out death, whether metaphorical death or literal death, if you're just rushing in order to solve a problem, to fix it just as quickly as possible, without knowing the lay of the land, without knowing the map, and with ignoring the territory, well, then you will get your team destroyed. And you'll get yourself destroyed in the process. By the way, if you go back and look at the Fellowship of the Ring, Boromir failed the leadership test. But the second son, the unwanted son, the son that Denethor the first, or maybe it was the second, would have gladly sacrificed in return of the king to have his first son back, that son proved to be more honorable and more valuable in the clutch, because he actually understood what happens when you don't know the score. Gandalf, Theoden, Sauruman, Faramir, and of course Grima Wormtongue. These are all avatars of leadership, and we can learn something about leadership, both positive and negative, from all of them, from The Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers. This book was not really written. I want to be very clear. This book was not really written as sort of a second part. It was written as a continuation of the first part, just as the third book will be written as the summation of all three parts. And so you might want to go back and listen to our episode number 76 before this with Tom Libby, where we cover the Fellowship of the Ring and kind of get some background. And we did not read the whole book. As I mentioned, there's a whole lot of things that happen, and you know this, of course, if you've seen the 20-year-old films. The leadership lessons from The Lord of the Rings, the leadership lessons from the Two Towers are very, very clear. Pieces are moving on the board in Middle-earth, and there are battles that are being fought in preparation for the final battle against the forces of evil, who are also moving their pieces into place. The first leader that we can look at is Gandalf. And Gandalf is, of course, wise and wizened, again played by Ian McKellen in the film, to perfection. But even more so than being wise and wizened, Gandalf is the voice of stability. And every leader needs a person like that on their team, even if they cannot be that person themselves. Remember, he told Frodo down in the Mines of Moria that there are other forces at work in this world besides the will of evil. That sort of checking of reality, that sort of checking of our impulses, in particular our fears, is really, really necessary for us in the times in which we live now, where anxiety is at an all-time high because of problems we think that we can't solve based on evils that we can give all other kinds of names to, except the right ones. Then you got Theoden, the king of Rohan. A fascinating character, fleshed out in the film quite nicely, given life. A ruler who is ruling at the death of the West, as a matter of fact. His penultimate line, "Where is the horse and the rider? Where is the horn that was blowing? They have passed like rain on the mountains, like wind in the meadow. How did it come to this?" How indeed. Many folks in the West these days, myself included, are looking around at the moral, spiritual, philosophical, societal, cultural, and at the bottom of the hierarchy, the political landscape, and asking ourselves this question: how did it come to this? Where is the horse and the rider? Where are the people who will be honorable and who will fight the battles? Yeah, they may be deceived by the Grima Wormtongues, the venal, crawling, snake-like yes-men, but once they are free of the yes-men, will they take action? Or will they choose to stay in their towers, holding broken horns on their laps, and lamenting with much internal bitterness the end of everything? We don't need more of that, and that's a huge reason for this podcast. Then we've got Sauruman, right? We've got the guy who was so smart that he thought he could cozy up to evil. He thought he could make a separate deal. J.R.R. Tolkien, writing this book in the backwash of World War I and completing the trilogy as World War II was beginning to ramp up, had to have been looking around in England and watching the news coming out of America and wondering who these isolationists were who thought they could get a deal with Hitler. Sauruman, much like Charles Lindbergh in real life, thought he could make a separate peace. And, well, you can't. You can't make a separate peace with evil. You have to identify it. You have to pin it. You have to destroy it utterly and completely, all the way down to the bottom, and then you have to move on. But in a relativistic and, shall we say, Weasley era such as ours, identifying and calling out evil, of course, has people pointing the fingers at you, but of course, they never say you're wrong. They just say you're evil too. See, the easy adolescent charge of hypocrisy flies back and forth. And it's real easy to call people hypocrites when you have no solutions for the evil in your midst, when you can't identify it or you don't have the courage to do so, or when you want to make your own deal and you want to be your own Sauruman in your own tower. Leaders, when Sauruman says to war, you better listen to him. and take him seriously, for calls of hypocrisy will do no good against such a man as that. And finally you got Faramir and Boromir, the last of the stewards of Gondor, and their father Denethor, who will factor quite heavily in Return of the King. And I note from the Silmarillion and from other writings by J.R.R. Tolkien this: death was ever present, speaking of the folks at Gondor. Death was ever present because the Númenóreans still, as they had in their old kingdom, and so lost it, hungered after endless life, unchanging. Hungered after endless life, unchanging. Faramir lusted in his heart for the thing that Boromir wanted, and Boromir lusted in his heart for the power that the ring would bring to control Mordor and to finally crush the evil of the West. And his father longed for his sons and for the ring because, quite frankly, he was tired of sitting in the steward's seat and wanted to be king himself. This is a point I'll bring up much later, but I'm going to introduce it here. Being a steward is a thankless role, and that's the point. You're not supposed to be looking for thanks. You're supposed to be behaving with honor. And when leaders forget that, stewardship goes right out the window. And well, that's it for me. Thank you for listening and subscribing to the Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast. If you're listening to this on any of the major podcast players, like iTunes, Google Podcasts, or Spotify, please go ahead and leave us a 5-star review and write a little bit in there. A couple of sentences is good enough. That actually helps us game those algorithms that I was just maybe addressing. And, of course, it helps us grow the show. Tell all your family, tell all your friends, and tell the leaders in your life that you know that need to be listening to this show that this show exists. By the way, if you want to get started on the leadership path yourself, or you know some people who need to go on the leadership path, HSCT Publishing, the home company of Leadership Toolbox and Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast, can help you and your team do that. So check out our training webinars, coaching services, and more at leadershiptoolbox.us. We are remote, we're live, we're in person, we're on video, and we've got leadership development solutions for your civic group, nonprofit staff, public sector staff, or even your private sector leaders. And of course, you're going to want to check out our video-based subscription service at leadingkeys.com. That's leadingkeys.com for leadership development on demand. You don't like videos, you don't like training, but you really like the podcast? Well, I would also recommend reading a book. Matter of fact, I'd recommend reading my most recent book, 12 Rules for Leaders, The Foundation of Intentional Leadership. You can get that in paperback, hardcover, or as an ebook on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Kobo, Ingram Spark, and any other place that you order books online. Finally, of course, we're on YouTube just like everybody else is. We'd love to have you help us grow the YouTube channel, so like and subscribe to the video version of this podcast on the HSCT Publishing channel on YouTube. Just search for HSCT Publishing, or you can search for Leadership Toolbox and hit the subscribe button. Subscribing helps us grow the show, as it does with the audio, just is the same with the video. All right, that's it for me.